Returning to Katahdin, an Appalachian Trail dream. Have you ever dreamt of hiking the AT? Bruce Matson did, so we're going to follow him every step of the way. Welcome back to Returning to Katahdin, an Appalachian Trail dream, sponsored by our friends at Trailtopia. We're already on to episode number 6, which we're calling the Working Gear List. In this, Bruce and I chat about how he has approached gear accumulation and what he can do without, as well as what he can't do without. These are important choices, so when you're planning your through hike, or even if you're only out there for a few days, you need to be comfortable with these choices. And remember, the most important mantra on the trail is hike your own hike. When you're sitting in camp and somebody tells you that your gear is all wrong, you need to smile at them and completely ignore them. It's your hike, you've got to carry it, so take what you want with you, not what somebody thinks you should have with you. Now, as you'd imagine, being the planner that he is, Bruce has a methodical way of looking at this. Before we start though, I'd like you to hear this. Do you remember those cold, wet evenings on the trail when you pitched up at a shelter and there was nothing you would have rather had than a beautiful, hot, home-cooked meal? Well, apart from actually going home, you could try out one of the delicious meals from Trailtopia. Why not dig into their spectacular jambalaya with its authentic Creole flavour? Or how about their beef stew, which is loaded with beef, potatoes, carrots, mushrooms, corn, green beans and green bell pepper in a fantastic beef gravy? Go on, try them. Trust me, you're going to love them. Trailtopia, the best of home cooking away from home. And we're back. I thought I'd quickly catch up with a couple of 5-star reviews from iTunes. Coal Furnace, who hiked the AT in 2004, says that our show brings back good memories of the trail. He says that he's reminded of how I felt and prepared for the trip. Great. Pony, a great friend of both podcasts, writes a really thorough review mentioning that Bruce is articulate and meticulous, while boisterous, funny, and at times irreverent. He goes on to say that it makes for surprising chemistry and it's fun to listen to. Thanks, Clay. Spielberg, also a previous guest on my other podcast, says, I wish I'd had this podcast while preparing for my through hike, and thanks us for giving the trail community another great resource. I love that you regard it as a resource, Craig. Appreciate it, man. And talking of man, get ready for this. Man 38713974613 is clearly trying to catch me out with his name, but says that I do a great job talking through the excitement of preparing for such a large undertaking as a through hike with Bruce. Thanks, Man 38713974613. We did get another non-5-star comment, and the program doesn't appear to be working for him at all. All I can say is that we'll be looking to capture your interest in the coming weeks, I promise. Now, with what he calls his working gear list, here's Bruce. Now we're back on with Bruce again. Hi, Bruce. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing really well. I hope you're well.
I am, yeah. And I haven't spoken to you for 2 weeks on the show anyway. And I'm going to start today. It was originally going to be just about the backpack, but this is about really the differences between ultralight and regular backpacking. But we'll come to that in a minute. But I'm going to start with a question from Gary Leclerc, who we had on the show last week, and at the very end of it asked him if you were going to ask a question of Bruce, what would it be? And his question was, Bruce, you're so curious, how are you going to keep your mind satisfied? Now, asking that in conjunction with this week's listener's question, which is very similar, Eliza Newland, is, have you actively sought after boredom recently? I think that's one thing that's unique about the trail, the opportunity to be bored and the mental preparation. That's an interesting thought, actually going out and actively trying to be bored. So combining that with Gary's question of you're so curious, how you can keep your mind satisfied, what's your answers to those then, Bruce?
Yeah, boy, those are some great questions. And we talked a little bit about boredom and whether boredom would actually run me off the the trail. And here's a way to think about boredom as a positive. Sometimes I think what this person might be reflecting on or suggesting is that, sort of calming ourselves and clearing out the clutter that we often have in our mind is a positive thing. So I can see that being sort of beneficial. We run pretty hectic lives, at least I think I do. I tend to jam a lot of things in. And
you certainly do, by the
way.
Sorry, I've got to interrupt. You certainly do, because Gary had a great story about you for the last week's show. And I know you haven't actually heard last week's show yet, but you're going to laugh when you hear it, I tell you. It really made us laugh.
Yeah, well, good. Yeah, I'm gonna listen to that when we finish this today. But for years I would sometimes get stressed or complain about being busy. But as the years went by, I realized that I must like it that way, because I do tend to fill my time voluntarily with new things. If there's a couple of moments gap, I seem to jam it full with a new volunteer activity or some other project that I'm interested in. So I think that's relevant, because if that is my nature, staying hyper busy, what will this trail experience be like? And I think those questions kind of point to that. So what's my answer? I mean, at one level, I really do think it'll be good to have more time that isn't structured, that allows me to do nothing. But I do think I'm going to do a lot of thinking out there. I don't know how you'd not do a lot of thinking.
Absolutely.
And as I've indicated earlier, we talked about the theme of the show. I do feel like this is a time in life where I really do want to, and I think need to look back and think about life, and grateful for the amazing blessings I've had, and also think about what should I do with the rest of my time. So I am very focused intentionally. I'm trying to think through those things. I think one of the beauties of the trail is the time that it's going to take. And I like to think that a lot of that thought process that I want to go through will be natural. I won't have to force it. I don't have like 3 hours. I need to finish all of these thoughts and come up with some conclusions. So in that sense, I'd like it to kind of come naturally.
Well, I think actually we raised this on either, I think it was actually on my show with somebody recently, that you think you've got all this time to think, and say it's going to be 6 months, 5 or 6 months. It's suddenly only when you get into Maine you realise I haven't thought through everything I wanted to think through. You think you've got a long time. You'll be surprised how fast this goes. So, get your thinking going in Georgia. If I were you, I really mean that.
Well, I do remember hearing that particular person. And I have to be honest, I sat back and really? I mean, that does seem like a lot of time. And I think for most of us, we've never actually had that much time.
You're right.
To do that. But it's still good advice. We've all had circumstances where things tend to end a lot quicker than we think. Where did 4 years of college go, or whatever it might be.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to suggest one thing that I kind of was going to keep to myself. Gary asked that question, and I do think it's a time to do a lot of things in terms of thinking about different things. But one of my, you'll appreciate this, because I know you're involved in writing a novel very quickly here, but I've always wanted to write a novel. I've always, I think all of us think we have a novel inside us.
Right.
It's very hard. I've started a number of times. And one of the things I actually thought about was, filling some of my time actually thinking through the plot and making notes, and actually trying to spend some of my free time and seeing if I could use these gaps of time to further develop some of the thoughts I had about writing a novel. So there it is. I put it out there. It was something I have to keep to myself, but that's one thing I've thought about doing.
So I'll be soon from Bruce Matson at the end of 2018, his new novel. Okay. Right. Now, last time we spoke, we looked at your planning in a more broad sense. In a couple of weeks, we're going to get deeper and deeper into the nitty-gritty of many of your specific gear decisions. But this week, I'd like to talk about the weight of your pack and how much you're trying to go what is often referred to these days as ultralight. Do you know how much of your kit how much your kit is actually going to weigh?
Yeah, so I'm pretty close to being finished with that process. I better be. It's not that far away. So I have kind of two weights. What I call my basic base weight, looks like it's right around 21 pounds, maybe a few ounces under 21 pounds. And because I'm leaving in the end of February, I anticipate that it could be very cold some days and some nights. And so I have what I call my quote unquote winter supplement, where I have a number of items that I think I need to have to take care of the real challenges of the winter if that comes in any serious way. And I'd be surprised if I don't have some days where I have to do that. So I've got certain items that I think I can shed when I get to Virginia. But I think for that first month, I'm going to have this extra weight. So I'm looking at about 25 pounds without food. And
including your winter supplement stuff?
Yes. To start, I think I'll be right around 25 pounds.
Okay, now, hang on. Before you go on with that, you say base weight. Let's make sure we all know what you mean by that term.
Sure. So in doing the reading that I've done over the years, I've come to understand base weight to mean everything that's in your pack without food and without water, not the stuff that's on your body. You know, you're wearing pants and a shirt and socks, whatever, but the items in your pack without considering what the water and food.
That includes the weight of your pack as well, though, doesn't it?
And I understand that to mean the weight of the pack as well. So, and that for me is going to be at 21 or 25 pounds. And, you know, you're going to have almost 10 pounds on top of that with a full resupply and some water.
Yeah. So you're looking on that first day, something like between 35 and 40, I guess. 35 with 25. Yeah, about 35 and 40, 35. I should think. Yeah. So, I thought that as well. I thought mine was about 35, and then I pitched up at the weigh-in, and you put your pack up there, and it was 42 pounds. Oh my gosh, that's a nightmare.
Yeah.
But every single pound counts, I tell you.
Yeah, and it's given me some, concern and maybe even some distress over the last number of months, because as I've read about and considered different alternatives, you do hear a lot about ultra-light alternatives, and there's a lot of disciples of ultra-light backpacking out there, and I constantly...
In my other show, Marty Blue and the Appalachian Trail, very early on, we had a guy called Max Mishkin, Barebag, talking about ultralight backpacking. And his kit in winter with food and water was about 15 pounds. It was amazing to me. And I've spoken to many others who, like Barebag, keep their base weight really, really low. So it's certainly a thing these days. How do you react to so much weight cutting? And are you concerned that you're going to be carrying too much?
Yes. I have been concerned, and I've had my kit, as we say, selected for a good number of months now. And I've looked at it, and I've weighed it, and have a pretty good idea of what it should be. But I keep looking at it because I have watched the number of ultra lightweight advocates on YouTube. I've read things. I've talked to people. And so I have been concerned that I have too much weight. So I keep looking at it, but I keep trying to figure out what is it that I can do without. I know if I go to one of these shakedowns on ultralight backpacker, they'll let me know really quickly what I can do without. But I think some of these things are a real personal decision.
Absolutely. And you've got to be comfortable with what you don't have in your pack. You've got to be. You obviously want to take as little as possible in terms of carrying weight, but there's stuff you personally might really want in your pack that other people wouldn't have in their pack. Something I learned recently, and very recently, in fact, a number of people suggest, and I kind of agree with this, that resupplying post office drops, while it's great, and I loved getting my food from home, it is so easy to resupply on the trail. You really don't need to carry that much with you. So if you can cut down your weight, I would think it's in carrying too much food, and also sometimes even carrying too much water. You've got to make sure you have water, but drink the water at the stream when you filter it, and then take another litre after you've drunk a litre. Little things like that will cut down your weight quite dramatically, because your base weight isn't too bad, I wouldn't have thought.
Yeah, I hope it's not. I have been worried about it, but I keep thinking this is sort of minimal for me. And if I've got to carry an extra few pounds as opposed to what an ultralighter might suggest, then maybe that's what I need to do. And I have gone out a number of times this year on shakedown hikes. And fortunately, every time I have run into some thru hikers. And so I've had a chance to talk to a number of thru hikers. And I have been able to speak to both people who ultralight devotees and other people who are a little more, hey, take what you want and be happy. And recently, I did this shakedown hike. I think I mentioned last time or the time before, and I actually ran into 4 different flip-floppers or southbound hikers. And they were all under 30 years old, and they had their packs were 40, 50, and 60 pounds.
Oh my gosh!
And I was one surprised, and the next thought was I was comforted to know that here are people who put in hundreds and hundreds of miles, and they seem very comfortable and self-satisfied with the weight they're carrying. In fact, the first person I took the time to sort of ask, do you mind if I ask, how much your pack weighs, is carrying the very same pack that I'm planning to use. Yeah. So I was like, gee, that pack is the same as my pack. And I looked at him and I was thinking to myself, that's pretty well fully loaded. I wondered what his pack is. And he couldn't have been nicer. He said he's a person, I'm almost always 3 pounds under or 3 pounds over 50 pounds.
Oh, my word.
Depending on where I am in my resupply. And I said, wow, that was more than I would have thought. So it's clear to me. And then I talked to, the next day I ran into a young woman and a young guy who were southbound. And their packs one was 60 and hers was 40. Wow. And I asked them sort of the same questions. And the guy said, he goes, when I started, mine was 80. And he said, I can't tell you how much free advice I got the first 2 weeks I was on the trail. And some of it was pretty critical. He said, I'd turn up at a shelter and people would be like, man, you've got to get rid of some of that stuff. And he reminded me, and I can remember the guy's name, so if anybody knows Munch or Mooch. I think it was Munch was the guy's name. And he came up to this young hiker 2-3 weeks into his trip with 80 pounds. And in the middle of all these people being critical and telling him he needed to ship stuff home, Munch came up to him and said, are you having a good time? And he goes, I'm having a great time. He goes, you don't need to talk to anybody else about your pack weight. So kind of the ultimate hike your own hike. So I mentioned those stories because I've gotten very comfortable with what I've chosen and the reason I've chosen certain things. And it might be a little heavier than some ultra lightweight hikers like barebag, but I really now have reduced my stress as it relates to these final gear decisions.
Yeah, well, it's important stuff. So, and we started out explaining your base weight of about 21 pounds. Are you settled in that right now? I mean, you're talking about, adding the food and water, obviously, but do you think that can come down further, or are you just happy with where you are?
I think I'm pretty settled where I am. I keep looking at the list, and I couldn't come up with things to cut. And my recent experience with these other thru hikers gave me confidence that I probably should stick with the things that I have. And a lot of that relates to, some people call them comfort items or luxury items.
Yeah.
And what I came to, I think, understand as part of this process is that I'm going to take some items for the very same reason that others get rid of those items and cut their base weight. And that might seem strange, but really what it's all targeted towards is, can we get to Katahdin happily, safely? And I think that there are certain items, so you might call comfort items, or gear decisions that add weight, but that I believe, for me, will enhance my ability to make it to Katahdin. And, you know,
Once you get started though, Bruce, you don't have to be set in stone, do you? You can make those changes as you go along. And you might think, well, I really don't need that, and ditch it, and then send it home anyway, and then move on from there.
No question. And then it's hard to, with even taking a lot of shakedown hikes and thinking and talking, until you're actually out there for multiple weeks, I don't think you ever really know how you're going to react. But, you know, a couple examples would be, I think when you talk to people, your shelter and your food decisions drive certain weight decisions.
Oh, yeah.
I remember when I was the very first hiker I met, when I was really starting to plan 3-4 years ago.
Uh-huh.
I think I've mentioned I've contacted hikers, and I'll try to meet them somewhere on the trail in Virginia and help them with their daily chores while they're off the trail, buy them dinner, and pick their brain and try to learn from them. And
Absolutely.
I was so excited. This was the first guy I had done this with. And I was in the middle of making a stove decision. I was reading a lot about alcohol stoves and canister stoves and different options. And I still had my old Surveyor white gas stove from the 70s. And by the time we finally sat down and had dinner, first big question I asked him, I said, well, what kind of stove are you using? And he looked at me, he said, he goes, I needed to save weight, so I decided to eat all dry food.
Oh,
so
good.
that was just one example of decisions you have to make. And the more I thought about that, I never thought about going dry food only. But the more I thought about it and thought about me and my own hike and my own success, I didn't think there was a way, even though I could save weight, and the ultralighters would love the fact that I am saving weight. And in their sort of formula, saving weight means a better chance to get the Katahdin. I didn't think there was any way I could get the Katahdin if I had to have cold oatmeal or energy bars every single day, and I couldn't have coffee in the morning or a warm meal at night. So I quickly decided that if some people think there's a weight penalty to a stove, well, I was going to accept that.
I've got to tell you that hot oatmeal every day sucks as well. So for 180 days, so heating it up doesn't really help. The coffee I would certainly miss, but I know more and more people seem to be going without a stove just literally to save a bit of weight. But that's as you say, it's a personal thing.
I can't imagine being happy enough for that period of time going that way, and that's what I mean. I think why this is very much you got to really be self-aware, I think, to manage the mental aspects of the hike. And for me, I need a stove, and maybe one time in the future we'll talk about what stove I picked and why. But that was one decision that, for some people, is a luxury item to have a stove.
Oh yeah.
But I'm going to accept that.
We're going to get down to specifically what you've taken and why you've chosen them going for you. But this is more about your gear selection in general. So for our purposes for today, was there a process that you used to let you better consider and contrast the various gear options?
Yeah, I was probably a little crazy in some respects in the planning process here.
Why restrict it just to the planning process?
So I had enough time, as we all know now. I've spending 3 or 4 years thinking about this, and my gear was 70s gear, and so it was fun to read about different choices, and it was really important to me to make the best decisions I could for each item, whether it be a stove or a tent or a jacket or a backpack or a raincoat. And so I read a lot of blogs. I read Backpacker magazine. I read lots of different things. And every time I would come across a new item, I would literally write it down. So I created this thing I call my working gear list.
All right.
And I'd have a category for backpacks, and I'd have a category for tents, and I'd have a category for rain gear. And rain gear is probably a good example. And so I'd write down like what gear I had and I was thinking about using, and then whether I should reconsider that. So when I went on the Camino a few years ago, I picked out a really nice Marmot minimalist rain jacket. I loved it. I never once looked at what the thing weighed. And It was a great jacket. I still have it. I've used it many times, but it is substantially heavier than so many of the lighter weight rain jacket options. So
Even though it's called the minimalist.
even though it's called minimalist, yeah. So I started writing down things like the helium-2, and some of these jackets are 5-6 ounces, and mine was like 18 ounces. And then I found there were things, skirts, rain kilts, and there were rain
please
chaps.
wear one. Please wear one. I want the pictures. I want the pictures.
And some people take a poncho. And then I read about and learned about this new invention called the paca, which this guy has invented a poncho that also serves as a rain cover for your backpack.
I met him at Trail Days. I actually interviewed him on the show for Trail Days, and
Did you?
I was really impressed with it. For those that don't know exactly what it is, would you like to expand on it?
Sure. I talked to him at Trail Days too. I thought it was ingenious, and I'm surprised more people don't know about it, because it took me a while to run across it. But it's basically, a rain cover. But I think what's so ingenious about it is when it starts to rain, you just reach back and you can pull out this poncho and fit yourself with the poncho without ever taking your pack off.
Yeah.
And it also works better as a poncho than a traditional poncho, because the way it's been designed, you don't have your straps over the poncho. There's more airflow created by the way it's worn. And I think it's really neat the way it's packaged up there as a rain cover. So, in fact, like my decisions on rain, so I do have a lighter weight rain jacket. I'm planning to take rain pants as part of that winter supplement.
Yeah.
But when the weather turns warmer, I am really thinking about, one, ditching the rain pants, but I'm really thinking about maybe using that paca, or since you want to see it, I really thought about using a kilt or a skirt, because the benefit of it, of course, is how much you weight, how much heat you get to avoid by not having pants on. So,
well, there is that. Funny enough, I don't know what other people think, and I'd love to hear actually. But when I had the great nice rain jacket and the rain pants and so on, and I just felt they just made me sweat more all the time. So once I got to past April, I think it was, I never put a jacket on in the rain at all. I just got wet and let myself get wet, and then dry out later on when you get to camp, because you're always going to be warm when you're hiking. You're never going to be cold. And as long as the weather itself isn't sort of down in the 30s, then you're okay to be walking through the rain. I just got absolutely drenched several times and just carried on hiking and covered my backpack, but I didn't bother covering me, because I hated that feeling of getting it raining from the outside and then you suddenly start sweating more and more on the inside, so you're being assaulted on both sides by liquid. And it was a very unpleasant feeling, I found. But that packer looks a great alternative, and trust me, folks, we're not getting paid for this, but we saw something and we both liked it, so that's kind of interesting.
It makes a lot of sense. So I might try it out. Your experience seems very similar. Many people told me the same thing, but you just can't stay dry, and so they would get wet and just deal with it. But in winter, the first month, I think rain pants are good for the rain, of course, but I also think they're very warm, because useful with the wind. And I think that to be cautious, having rain pants that can also serve as an insulating layer and a windproof layer will help me on those brutal days when you're going over a ball that it's 20 degrees and blowing 30 miles an hour.
And you will.
And I think so. So it's worth it to have that, because you really are out there and that's all you've got. So
so I like the idea of your planning process and the working gear list. It sounds like it was very useful to you. So eventually the setup in terms of what you're going to wear ends up being what? So
I've got your kind of traditional zip off long pants. So if I want to do that, one thing that I'm doing that I think I haven't seen as many people do is I've got a few of these lightweight, they're really shirts that are designed for fishing, and where a lot of people might wear just a pullover t-shirt, synthetic polyester layer that's quick drying. I found in some of my hiking, I like these long sleeve, super lightweight, super fast drying shirts that are buttoned up, long sleeve, and a lot of them are sort of, fall under a sort of fishing shirt category. But one reason I like them so much is I think you can regulate heat better with, buttons that on the front that can go up and down, sleeves that you can pull down or pull up, and they dry so incredibly fast.
They do. They really do, yeah.
They provide a little more optionality, I think, than just having, like a running shirt, a synthetic T-shirt, or even a long sleeve. So that would be my basic. And then, I've got one fleece layer, a synthetic fleece layer, and then I've got, a rain layer that can serve as a waterproof, windproof, and insulating layer. And that's sort of, would be my basic. If it's really cold, I will slip on the rain pants.
Yeah.
And if it's really, really cold, I have thermal underwear that I plan to sleep in. And if it's so cold that I can't get warm hiking, I'll have a third layer. So I can wear insulating underwear, a layer of pants, and then rain pants. And I think those three layers, when you're hiking with 35 pounds, your back probably can generate enough heat to stay warm.
Oh, yes. Yes, I'm sure it will. And we've also, of course, now got the looking forward to the prospect of seeing you in a kilt sometime in the summer. So we're really looking forward to that. Well, look, that's great. I think it's a really nice run through of what you've got in mind. And next week, we haven't actually decided what we're going to talk about next week, but I'll catch up with you again next week and speak to you soon.
All right. Very good, Steve. Thanks again.
Okay, mate. Bye.
All right. Take care. Good.
He met a bloke who was carrying a 60-pound pack, and that was down from 80 pounds. Oh, my gosh. A 21-pound base weight seems pretty darn good to me, and I suppose it's that combination of comfort, utility, and weight that has to be constantly balanced. The great thing about a 5 or 6 month stay in the woods is that you get plenty of opportunities to readjust. He'll soon work out precisely what he needs and make that adjustment. Let's face it, he's playing so much that I'm sure he's sufficiently flexible to plan while on the move. Actually, that's a thought. I know that people lose a ton of weight from their bodies during the AT hike. I wonder how much weight they lose or get rid of from their packs by the end. I'd love to hear from you on that. So if you can, send me an email to steve@mightyblueontheat.com. Also, by the way, I feel that it's vital that we all encourage Bruce in his kilt-wearing plan. If nothing else, a breezy day on Max Patch should get some very interesting photographs. I need to see pictures. This week's question came from Eliza Newland, and I've already contacted Eliza and sent her mailing address on to Trailtopia. She's a picky vegetarian, her words by the way, but Trailtopia has her covered, and 2 vegetarian meals should be on their way. Thanks, Eliza. Please remember to keep sending me questions for Bruce. Every week I'll be putting one to him, and Trailtopia will be handing out a couple of meals. Nice. That's about it for today. Next week's show is about setting records. Nope, Bruce is not going for the fastest known time. The records are very much on his mind. Bruce and I will see you next week.